Mr. Rosen,
Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, Mexico, working on oil painting Angel Fire. Alright, today I'm going to start in with this left side here and just start brightening and bringing some detail into those clouds with some violet and some dark yellow.
Describing the last-minute meeting held at the White House on New Year's Eve.
The president was a little more agitated than he had been on the meeting, in the meeting.
Sorry, magenta and dark yellow. Did I say violet? I said violet.
He discussed a variety of election matters. He did say, this sounds like the kind of thing that would warrant appointment of a special counsel. There was a point at which the president said something about, why don't you guys seize machines?
Mr. Rosen, the president asked you to seize voting machines from state governments. What was your response to that request?
We had seen nothing improper with regard to the voting machines, and I told them that the real experts at that had been at DHS, and they had briefed us that they had looked at it and that there was nothing wrong with the voting machines. And so that was not something that was appropriate to do.
There would be no factual basis to seize machines. Mr. Donahue,
I don't think there was legal authority either.
Yeah, Mr. Donahue, can you explain what the president did after he was told that the Justice Department would not seize voting machines?
The president was very agitated by the acting attorney general's response, and to the extent that machines and the technology was being discussed, the acting attorney general said that the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has expertise in machines and certifying them and making sure that the states are operating them properly. And since DHS had been mentioned, the president yelled out to his secretary, "Get Ken Cuccinelli on the phone." And she did in very short order. Mr. Cuccinelli was on the phone. He was the number 2 at DHS at the time. I was on the speakerphone. And the president essentially said, "Ken, I'm sitting here with the acting attorney general. He just told me it's your job to seize machines, and you're not doing your job." And Mr. Cuccinelli responded.
Mr. Rosen, did you ever tell the president that the Department of Homeland Security could seize voting machines?
No, certainly not.
Mr. Donahue, during this meeting, did the president tell you that he would remove you and Mr. Rosen because you weren't declaring there was election fraud?
Toward the end of the meeting, the president, again, was getting very agitated, and he said, "People tell me I should just get rid of both of you. I should just remove you and make a change in leadership, put Jeff Clark in, maybe something will finally get done." And I responded, as I think I had earlier in the December 27th call, "Mr. President, you should have the leadership that you want, but understand, the United States Justice Department functions on facts, evidence, and law, and those are not going to change. So you can have whatever leadership you want, but the department's position is not going to change."
The president's White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, was also present. Do you remember what his position was?
Pat was very supportive. Pat Cipollone, throughout these conversations, was extremely supportive of the Justice Department. He was consistent. I think he had an impossible job at that point, but he did it well, and he always sided with the Justice Department in these discussions.
So let's pause for a second. It's New Year's Eve. President Trump is talking about seizing voting machines and making the same demands that had already been shot down by former Attorney General Barr on at least 3 occasions, and by Mr. Rosen and Mr. Donahue on multiple other occasions. Claim after claim knocked down, but the president didn't care. The next day, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows sent a flurry of emails to you, Mr. Rosen, asking that the department look into a new set of allegations. We're going to put those emails here on the screen. Here we see 3 requests made on January 1st. One email is a request from Mr. Meadows to you, Mr. Rosen, to send Jeff Clark to Fulton County. What did you do with this request?
Well, really nothing. Certainly didn't send Mr. Clark to Fulton County, but that email was the first corroboration I had seen of Mr. Clark had told me at that point that the president was considering making the change by Monday, January 4th. So Mr. Meadows' email was something of a corroboration that there were discussions going on that I had been not been informed about by Mr. Clark or anybody else.
Interesting. The second request that you have is to have the Department of Justice lawyers investigate allegations of fraud related to New Mexico. Mr. Rosen, did you have concern about these emails?
Yes. Really two concerns about that one. One was that it was coming from a campaign or political party, and it was really not our role to function as an arm of any campaign for any party or any campaign. That wasn't our role, and that's part of why I had been unwilling to meet with Mr. Giuliani or any of the campaign people before. And the other part was, it was another one of these ones where lots of work had already been done, and I thought it was a rehash of things that had been debunked previously.
So the final email here included a completely baseless conspiracy theory that an Italian defense contractor uploaded software to a satellite that switched votes from Trump to Biden. The Select Committee investigation found that this wild, baseless conspiracy theory made it from the recesses of the internet to the highest echelons of our government. On December 31st, Mr. Meadows received this internet conspiracy theory from Representative Perry. On the screen now is the text that Representative Perry sent to Mr. Meadows, copying a YouTube link with the message, quote, "Why can't we just work with the Italian government?" The next day, the President's Chief of Staff sent the YouTube link to Mr. Rosen, who forwarded it to Mr. Donahue. Mr. Donahue, did you watch this video?
I did, Congressman.
How long was the video?
Approximately 20 minutes.
Let's just take a look at an excerpt of that video, if we may.
What's being said out of Rome, out of Italy, is that this was done in the U.S. Embassy. That there was a certain State Department guy, whose name I don't know yet. I guess this is probably going to come out in Italy at some point. And he was the mastermind, not the mastermind, but anyway, the guy running the operation of changing the votes. And that he was doing this in conjunction with some support from MI6, the CIA, and this Leonardo group.
Mr. Donahue, what was your reaction when you watched that entire 20-minute video?
I emailed the acting attorney general and I said pure insanity, which was my impression of video, which was patently absurd.
Mr. Rosen, you were asked by Mr. Meadows to meet with Mr. Johnson, who is the person in that video. What was your reaction to that request?
So, ordinarily I'd get an email like this and there was no phone call. It would just come over the transom. But this one he called me, Mr. Meadows, and asked me to meet with Mr. Johnson. And I told him this whole thing about Italy had been debunked, and that should be the end of that, and I certainly wasn't going to meet with this person. And he initially seemed to accept that. He said, well, why won't you meet with him? I said, because if he has real evidence, which this video doesn't show, he can walk into an FBI field office anywhere in the United States. There's 55 of them. And he said, okay. But then he called me back a few minutes later and complained and said, I didn't tell you, but this fellow Johnson is working with Rudy Giuliani, and Mr. Giuliani is really offended that you think they have to go to an FBI field office. That's insulting. So couldn't you just have the FBI or you meet with these guys? And by then I was somewhat agitated and told them that there was no way on earth that I was going to do that. I wasn't going to meet with Mr. Johnson. I certainly wasn't going to meet with Mr. Giuliani. I made that clear repeatedly, and so that's the end of that. Don't raise this with me again. And so, because Mr. Donahue and I had been exchanging our views about this, it was 7:13 on a Friday night of New Year's Day. I had run out of patience, and I sent the email that you're talking about. I made pretty clear that I had no interest in doing anything further with this.
Just to button this up, Mr. Donahue, did you receive a follow-up call from a Department of Defense official about this conspiracy?
I did, I believe it was that same day.
Can you give details on that at all?
I received a telephone call from Kash Patel, who I know was a DoD official at that time, worked for, I believe, Acting Secretary of Defense Miller, and he didn't know much about it. He basically said, do you know anything about this Italy thing and what this is all about? And I informed him that the Chief of Staff had raised the issue with us in his office on December 29th, that we had looked into it a little bit. We had run the name that was provided to us by the Chief of Staff. I learned that that individual was in custody in Italy. He had been arrested for a cyber offense of some sort in Italy. The allegation was that he had been exfiltrating data from his company. He was either an employee or a contractor of that company. He was in custody. That the whole thing was very, very murky at best, and the video was absurd. But that we the department, were not going to have anything to do with it, and DoD should make its own mind as to what they're going to do. But I made it clear to him that I didn't think it was anything worth pursuing.
So you called the video absurd, and despite the absurdity of that conspiracy theory, we learned that Mr. Meadows discussed it frequently in the White House. And Mr. Meadows didn't let the matter go. The request went from the Department of Justice to the Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller. As you'll hear, Secretary Miller actually reached out to a high-ranking official based in Italy to follow up on this claim.
The ask for him was, can you call out to Defense Attaché Realm and find out what the heck's going on, because I'm getting all these weird, crazy reports, and probably the guy on the ground knows more than anything.
The Select Committee confirmed that a call was actually placed by Secretary Miller to the attaché in Italy to investigate the claim that Italian satellites were switching votes from Trump to Biden. This is one of the best examples of the lengths to which the President Trump would go to stay in power. Scouring the internet to support his conspiracy theories, shown here, as he told Mr. Donahue in that December 27th call, quote, "You guys may not be following the internet the way I do." President Trump's efforts to this point had failed. Stonewalled by Mr. Rosen and Mr. Donahue, President Trump had only one option. He needed to make Clark acting Attorney General. Mr. Rosen, during a January 2nd meeting with Mr. Clark, did you confront him again about his contact with the President? And if so, can you describe that?
So, at this point, Mr. Clark had told us that the President had asked him to consider whether he would be willing to replace me, supposedly on a timetable by Monday, 4th. And so, I had told Mr. Clark I thought he was making a colossal error in judgment, but I also hoped to persuade him to be more rational and to understood what we had understood, that there's not a factual basis for the fraud assertions that are being made. So at this meeting, Mr. Donahue and I met with Mr. Clark. And I guess my hopes were disappointed in that Mr. Clark continued to express view that he thought there was fraud, even though he had not been a participant in the department's review of that, and that he was dissatisfied that we knew what we were doing. So, but he had acknowledged that he had had further, I don't know if it was meeting or phone calls or what, but further discussion with the President, despite having, a week earlier said that if he wouldn't do that, and if he did, if he got an invitation to do that, he would let Rich Donahue or me know. So, it was a contentious meeting where we were chastising him that he was insubordinate, he was out of line, he had not honored his own representations of what he would do, and he raised again that he thought that letter should go out, and we were not receptive to that.
Did he tell you that the President had offered him the job of acting Attorney General?
That was a day later. On the 2nd, he said that the President had asked him to let him know if he'd be willing to take it. Subsequently, he told me that on Sunday the 3rd. He told me that the timeline had moved up and that the president had offered him the job and that he was accepting it.
Well, let's ask about that. What was your reaction to that?
Well, on the one hand, I wasn't going to accept being fired by my subordinate, so I wanted to talk to the president directly. With regard to the reason for that is I wanted to try to convince the president not to go down the wrong path that Mr. Clark seemed to be advocating. And it wasn't about me. There's only 17 days left in the administration at that point. I would have been perfectly content to have either the gentleman on my left or right replace me if anybody wanted to do that. But I did not want for the Department of Justice to be put in a posture where it would be doing things that were not consistent with the truth, were not consistent with its own appropriate role, or were not consistent with the Constitution. So I did 4 things as soon as Mr. Clark left my office on that Sunday, the 3rd. Number 1, I called Mark Meadows and said I need to see the president right away. He was agreeable and set up a meeting for 6:15 at Sunday, so about 2 hours away. 2, I called Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, told him what was going on, and he said he would go into the White House to make sure he was at the meeting and he would be supporting the Justice Department's position, as he had been doing consistently. 3, I called Steve Engel, who was, I was at the department, it was a Sunday, but there had been some reasons I needed to be there. Mr. Engel, I called at home and asked him if he would come in and go to the meeting, which he did. That proved to be quite helpful. And then number 4, I asked Rich Donahue and Pat Hovakimian, who had previously been my chief of staff, to get the department's senior leadership on a call and let them know what was going on, and which they did. And then Eric Hirschman called me to tell me that he was going to go to the meeting and that he would be supporting the Department of Justice position as well. So I knew that the meeting was on course and that I would have a number of people supportive of the Department of Justice's approach and not supportive of Mr. Clark's approach.
Did Mr. Clark ask you to continue to stay at the department?
At that Sunday meeting, when he told me that he would be replacing me, he said that he had asked to see me alone, because usually he met with me and Mr. Donahue, because he thought it would be appropriate in light of what was happening to at least offer me that I could stay on as his deputy. I thought that was preposterous. I told him that was nonsensical and that there's no universe where I was going to do that, to stay on and support someone else doing things that were not consistent with what I thought should be done. So I didn't accept that offer, if I can put it that way.
And during that meeting, did Mr. Clark ask you to sign the Georgia letter?
That was on the Saturday meeting, January 2nd, Mr. Donahue and I had with him. He again raised, with both of us, that he wanted us to, both to sign that letter, actually.
So in that meeting, did Mr. Clark say he would turn down the president's offer if you reversed your position and signed the letter?
Yes.
Did Mr. Clark, so you still refused to sign and send that letter, I take it?
That's right. I think Mr. Donahue and I were both very consistent that there was no way we were going to sign that letter, and it didn't matter what Mr. Clark's proposition was in terms of his own activities. We were not going to sign that letter as long as we were in charge of the Justice Department.
Thank you for that, by the way. Mr. Donahue, were you expecting to have to
so
attend
that's
a
it
meeting
for the
at the White
moment.
House on
It
Sunday,
gets in a little more
January 3rd?
magenta and yellow glazing, gold sort of
as the
glow.
acting AG indicated,
And it's
we
starting to
had
come
a meeting
together a little
that
bit.
afternoon that related to
So,
preparations for January
at least
6th,
for the
so I was at
background
the
portion of it.
department, but I had no expectation of leaving the department.
So that's
It
Adam
was a
Sturch
Sunday
broadcasting
afternoon,
from the Mushroom Mansion,
and I was
Taos,
there
Mexico, working on
swinging
oil
clothes,
painting Angel Fire.
both work.
Thank you,
And
and
we
have a
expected to
good
have
night.
that meeting, do some other work, but I had no expectation